And so if we can reverse those conditions, and we can with the ketogenic diet, for most people, I should mention, ketogenic diets aren't for everyone. There are some medical contraindications. They're rare, but you need to discuss that with your physician, and you should never make, it's a significant metabolic change. So you should never make that change without consulting with your physician. But assuming it is, and about 7 out of 8 people respond positively, you can reverse those conditions, and sometimes very quickly. Typically within a month or so, you'll see great improvements. You'll start losing body fat, your blood sugar will start to regulate, your inflammatory markers in your blood will go down, your other biomarkers like your blood pressure and so on will improve. And we see this time and time again. It's very consistent. There's very, very good long-term, robust science to support this. So that's how making this change in your diet from going from we should probably talk about what a ketogenic diet is, but
Yes.
shifting from this high carbohydrate diet to a very low carbohydrate diet, in fact, almost a no carbohydrate diet outside of fiber, that's what allows you to make this metabolic improvement.
So you reduce your carbohydrates intake and you increase your fat intake.
Yeah,
right?
and there's only 3 macronutrients that give us our calories. The third being proteins. There are other nutrients, vitamins and minerals and
Yes.
even water. But those are the 3 macronutrients where we get our calories from. And protein, there is no safe upper limit that's been identified for protein. But in practical terms, between 25 and 30% of your calories is probably a good maximum. After that, you start to run into some complications. So if you're taking, if you have those 3 things and your protein in the middle here is like 25%, and you're taking the carbohydrate, which was maybe 70%, out 60 or 70% down to less than 5%, then you have to compensate by eating more fat. And so we've been told to fear fat. We've been told to hate fat and all these low fat products. All of that, and very supported by the processed food industry, who love to give people high carbohydrate foods that have lots of sugar in them because we'll eat them. In fact, they design those foods so we can't stop eating them, which is, borderline criminal in my mind.
Yes.
But when people worry about adding fats, but there are some bad fats. Trans fats, for example, are not healthy. Although if they're occurring in natural living things, they're okay. There are trans fats in meats and things, but they're okay. But the artificial trans fats are not good. But there's this great fear of saturated fat, and saturated fat is, most people think of that associated with animals, but there's also saturated fats in plants. Those fats there's never, if you look at the research about this, you'll see that there isn't any conclusive, robust science that proves that eating more saturated fat will cause more heart disease. That's the argument. It's always been saturated fat causes heart disease. It doesn't. I can tell you, I've looked for 10 years for any shred of evidence that saturated fats cause heart disease. Saturated fats in combination with a high carbohydrate diet, that's a separate issue. But on their own, saturated fats do not cause heart disease. And so you can eat all the butter. I like grass-fed butter because it's high in omega-3 fatty acids. You can eat the fat on your steak. I like eating grass-fed beef that's organically raised and humanely raised. And then there's, the monounsaturated fats like like olive oil, and then other like
Coconut oil.
Yeah, the nut oils. So all the nut oils like avocado oil, macadamia oil, they're all good. I don't think that seed oils are healthy. I think they're highly inflammatory. So all of those cheap seed oils, including corn oil that they use in a lot of processed foods, are actually highly inflammatory. They're very high in omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory, whereas grass-fed beef and some of these others are much higher in omega-3. Fish oil is another good example.
And what about beans? Beans are carbohydrates and proteins.
Yeah, that's what they are, carbohydrates and proteins. So listen, there's, or an apple, if you want to talk about an apple. On their own, there's nothing wrong with these things. You're not going to look at it and say, well, you should never eat that. That's unhealthy. But we're talking about how you constitute the bulk of what you're going to be eating. So beans do have protein in them. Now, remember, beans as they exist, the little husk, they actually have, you could not eat raw beans. They're poisonous.
Yeah.
You have to boil them and remove that, soften them essentially. But the problem with beans is even though they have good protein, they're very high in carbohydrate, and a lot of that carbohydrate is in the form of starch. So that will raise your blood sugar. Now, do they have fiber? Yes, but you can get fiber from other sources. If you look at an apple, well, an apple, I like to talk about apples because, everybody likes apples, and there's the old adage, I'm sure they have it in Spain too, an apple a day keeps the doctor away.
Yes.
And I'm sure in Ireland it's much more poetic than that. But an apple, if you think about what a fruit is not something that's been designed by plants to make humans healthy. A fruit is something that plants have evolved to have that will get animals to eat them. And the way you get animals to eat them is you put sugars in there. And so, and then what we've done with agriculture is we've modified these, and it's genetically modified, yes, through interbreeding and so on. But we've created these apples. They're nothing like a wild apple. They're super sweet. And they have these names like Honey Crisp. And, they're just these super sweet. And so those aren't like a real natural apple anyway. And yes, they have some fiber in them, some soluble fiber, and they have some vitamins. But it's really just a big sugar bomb. There's so much sugar in there that, again, that will spike your blood sugar. Not as much maybe as just eating starch. So I limit that. I do eat fruit. I eat typically a handful of berries a day, strawberries, blackberries, blueberries, and that's because they have these phytochemicals in there that are really very beneficial. But I don't eat a lot of other fruit. My wife and I, we'll buy an apple, and we'll share like a quarter of an apple. We'll have like a slice. We treat it like candy, right? Maybe after dinner, a little slice of apple or something in the morning. So beans, really, for a ketogenic diet, by the way, a lot of people think ketogenic diets are carnivore diets, that you only eat bacon and eggs and meats. You can be vegan on a ketogenic diet. It's challenging, and you'll probably have to eat a lot of soy. By the way, soy is one bean that's very high in protein and low in starch. So soybeans are kind of okay. Mm-hmm. And we have green and yellow beans, those string beans, those are okay too. But the other beans you're talking about, and legumes and pulses, mm-hmm. Those are going to be very high in starch. So you can't eat those and also be ketogenic. And I'm not sure if we'll have time today, but I'm happy to talk about it. The benefits of a ketogenic diet are not just through the reduction of the carbohydrate effects on your metabolism, but also the very beneficial effects of the ketones that are produced. So we call it ketogenic. Mm-hmm. So the genic comes from Genesis, which is from the Bible, which means creation, right? So it's mm-hmm. It's not from the Bible, but same thing. It means creation. So ketogenesis, ketogenic diets means creation of ketones. And ketones are created when we burn fats instead of carbohydrates. So when you stop eating carbohydrates, you still need blood sugar, but your liver can do that. Your liver and your kidneys happily make that through a process called gluconeogenesis, which means making new glucose from non-glucose sources. So there's no problem there. But when you burn fats, you produce these ketones as a byproduct. And these are very powerful. They're energy molecules that can be burned. So they're almost like a fourth kind of macronutrient. They'd probably fit best into the fat category, but they can be burned, and they're burned very efficiently, and they burn with much less oxidative stress and much less inflammatory impact. In fact, your brain will prefer to use ketones. The main one is called beta hydroxybutyrate, or BHB. And your brain will prefer that over the glucose. It can't use proteins and fats. Your other tissues are pretty flexible, in particular your heart is, but even your heart will choose to use ketones first. So it's an energy fuel. It's also a powerful signaling molecule, like a hormone. And one of the things it does is help to mediate the inflammatory response, this innate immune response.